Today we're looking at Psalm 111, and it is a worship psalm and exhortation psalm. Praise you the Lord. I will praise the Lord with my whole heart in the assembly of the upright and in the congregation. The works of the Lord are great, sought out of all of them that have pleasure therein. He wants us to have pleasure in his statutes, have pleasures in his rules, his laws. His values are made for us to enjoy this planet, to enjoy the good food and what he brings to us. It is sin that says what God brings isn't enough. Here is more. And when you think there's more to what God has to give, it's always less. But a wonderful exhortation psalm. He hath made his wonderful works to be remembered. That's why we have this Bible, that we might remember his works, see his works. And by seeing his works in the Bible, we very often see his works in our own lives. So, again, the examples here we can see and we can utilize. He has given meat unto them that fear him. He will be mindful of his covenant. He has shown his people the power of his works, that they may give them the heritage of the heathen. Heritage of the heathen. The heathen will be the heritage that Israel will get. That he has shown his people the power of his works, that he may give them the heritage of the heathen. The things that the heathen are supposed to inherit will go to Israel. The works of his hands are judgments. All of his commandments are sure. You can trust him. They stand fast forever and are done in truth and uprightness. That's all they are. They are definitely truth and uprightness. In verse 10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We quote that one a lot in Christianity. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all they that do his commandments. His praise endureth forever. He wants us to have understanding. He wants us to use wisdom in all circumstances. And the fear of the Lord, isn't just I'm afraid, but I'm afraid not to do it his way, because his way is the right way. If you've got a friend that tells you how to take a part off a car, you should be afraid not to do it that way, because that's how the part comes off. Fear is not just I'm afraid and I'm quaking. I'm afraid I'm going to get this wrong, because that's the right way to do it. So we have to realize that fear of the Lord is the beginning of the wisdom, respect, and he is an awesome God that we should fear. He is so powerful and awesome. I think we will quake before him, even though our sins are forgiven. Well, I think we will see him as the fearful, wonderful, and mighty God. We were moving on in 1 Samuel. Samuel has anointed Saul. Saul has become king in front of the people. And Samuel addresses the people, and he tells them, after that they have inaugurated Saul. Saul was first anointed by Samuel, and then he was taken in front of the people, and he was introduced to the people as their king appointed by God. Then the Ammonites attacked at Gilgal and wanted to subjugate the people there. And of course Saul and Samuel moved on that, and God gave them the glory. And so all the people were living at peace. They had sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all of the men rejoiced greatly. In chapter 12, just rehashing that Samuel addresses the people, reminds them that he has not been a man of lucre, he's not been a man of bribery, he's been an honest person. He even calls them to recounting of that. They agree. Then he goes over their history for a little bit, reminding them how the Lord had brought them out of Egypt, that he'd taken them through the Red Sea, but how their fathers had rebelled against God and had turned from God. And even reminded them what happened at Baal Peor, and how they had worshipped Balaam and Ashtoreth. And he reminds them of our book of Judges, how he sent Zerubbabel and Samuel and Samson and Jephthah and all of them to deliver you out of the land from your enemies, and you dwelt safely. When God was protecting you through his judges, you dwelt safely. But then you turned to sin. And he tells them, though, that if you're going to have this king, he says, if you will fear the Lord and serve him and obey him and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then both you and your king shall continue. So the idea that he's making this concession, that, okay, you guys want a king, I don't want you to have a king. It was not his will that they have a king, that Yahweh himself would be their king. But the people want a king, so he's backing the play. Okay, but as long as you and this king stay with me everything will be fine. But Samuel warns them that if you obey not the voice of the Lord and rebel against his commandments, then shall the hand of the Lord be against you as well against your fathers. So we see this blessing and this possible cursing if you turn against. So it's all up to Saul and the people about what they're going to do. And he tells them that they have been wicked in choosing a king, but God is working with them. He says, moreover, God forbid that I shouldn't sin against God by not praying for you. For the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sakes, because it pleased the Lord to make you his people. He tries to pull this on a high note. Look, it pleases God to make you his people. The problem here is right after we leave 12, we're on a high note. Okay, just stick with Yahweh and everything will be fine. But things go off the rails pretty quickly. Saul reigned for a year, and after he'd reigned 2 years, they had some problems with the Philistines, and he gathers up his army, and he has a son named Jonathan. Now remember, this is 2 years after he became king, so maybe he was in his 40s. Jonathan might have been in his 20s. But here's something I want to point out, that if Samuel admitted in chapter 12 that he was becoming an old man. So Samuel probably was the age of a grandfather of Saul, line-wise. If, the idea that, I'm just saying that Saul's father, Kish, was probably in the same generation as Samuel. So the idea that, again, you get this generational thing where you have Samuel, Saul, and Jonathan are all together here. And his son Jonathan comes up and is a leader of men and leads 1,000 men. And he smites a garrison of Philistines. We see a garrison can be anywhere from, 15 to 30 men that are posted out in different parts to both give information and to fight with anyone that comes their way. Israel was still kind of under their thumb. They were never really released at this point. But the Philistines were at the south, if you remember that map from yesterday. Then they had the Ammonites up to the northeast, Moabites in the east, and then you had the Esau and the Edomites were at the southeast. So they were kind of surrounded, and later on you'll have the Syrians upon the northwest. So they're just surrounded by enemies all the time, and they need God. So the Philistines gathered to fight against them, and Israel saw that they were in straits, and they started hiding in caves and hiding in thickets and hiding, because now here come these Philistines, and they were very afraid. So Saul gets his army up, and here's where Saul sins. This is the place where Saul has his army up. He's got 3,000 men, but they're starting to dwindle away because the Philistines are growing stronger, and they're becoming afraid. They're losing confidence in Saul. And Samuel tells him to wait. Wait till I get there, and I will do the burnt offering, and the Lord will move on this, and he will be the captain of the Lord's host, and he will give victory to you through him. So this is what's going to happen. But Samuel takes his time. Saul starts to get worried. His men are leaving, so he sins by killing the offering, doing the burnt offering himself. See, that was not the problem. He was supposed to wait on Samuel. Well, Samuel gets there, and Saul starts making all kinds of excuses. It was the people, they were starting to leave. I was getting, he says, I forced myself, therefore, and offered a burnt offering. I didn't want to, but I forced myself. He's making, he's not really confessing any sin. He's making excuses. Samuel says that the kingdom's going to be taken from you. You do not have a heart for God. This is a choice that someone would have. You aren't just giving a heart for God. He was given a heart that he might turn towards God, but he did not utilize that. We are responsible for our hearts. We're responsible for our minds. We're responsible for our actions before God. He doesn't pull puppets on a string. It's up to us to honor him with everything we say and do. That's why he says in the Psalms, whole heart. Well, Saul did not do whole heart. So Samuel tells him that you're going to lose the kingdom, that God's going to give it to a man who is after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be a captain over the people. So now he's prophesying that Saul will lose. So Saul goes with his army, though, because he's going to stand up and save the people Israel. He and Jonathan move up to save up in Gilboa in Benjamin, and they're camped out. And at that time, the Philistines would not let the Hebrews have any swords, any shields, or any spears. They really did gun control on them. They took away all their armament, but they were using anything they could. They couldn't file their axes. They couldn't sharpen their axes without going to the Philistines, but they were able to find files, and they used these files to make weapons. And there were garrisons around, so they started attacking these garrisons. 14 is a long chapter, trying to cover it all in a few minutes without going too quickly. We get an idea of the leadership style of Jonathan versus the leadership style of Saul, and seeing where the hearts are. Jonathan's going out, and he knows that there's a garrison of Philistines. Again, this could be anywhere from 12 to 30 people. He and just one other person is armor bearer. They go and see that there's some Philistines, and they're like, okay, God might be giving these to us because we've come upon them. Let's see if God wants us to. So I'll tell you what, he starts doing a little bit of a fleece. He goes, I'll tell you what, we'll stand up, and if they say, come to me, that means that the Lord, let's see, let me get this straight here. And he says, tarry, if they say, come to you, we will stand our place. If they say, come up unto us, then we know it's from the Lord. So if they say, come to us, then the Lord says, these will be yours. If they say, we will come to you, then we will run away, because the Lord doesn't give us the battle. So always trying to get that one straight. I always get that one backwards sometimes. So what happened is they crawled up out of the grass, and the men said, come up unto us. And then they knew that the Lord was giving them the battle. Now the interesting thing here, that we are told that there are 20 men here, and 2 men took on 20. That's a 10-to-1 ratio against them. But God gave them the victory. And there was trembling now, because there was the rumor. You know, they'd heard about how powerful the God of Israel was, and all of a sudden there was, this was going through the camp of the Philistines, that God was on the side of these men, and all of a sudden they became very afraid. And the Philistines started falling upon one another, and they started melting away. And then Saul jumped in, and he goes, find out who did this, find out who's gone. And he found out that Jonathan was gone. So then he grabs the ark of God, and he goes off, and they talk to the priest that was with the ark of God. And Saul and all the people that were with him assembled themselves and came to battle, and behold, every man's sword fell against his own soldier, against his own fellow. So the idea that the Philistines were fighting among themselves. This is again very reminiscent of Gideon and the Midianites. And the Hebrews that were in the camp of the Philistines, maybe they were mercenaries, maybe they were slaves, they turned against the Philistines. So this got even worse. And all the men of Israel that hid themselves in the mountain of Ephraim came down, and the Lord saved Israel that day. He saved Israel through Jonathan in this. Saul just responded and reacted. It was Jonathan's faith that led to this victory. But what happens next is Saul's not a very good religious person, in a sense that Jonathan understood the situation and put out a bit of a fleece, which in some instances we argue back and forth about whether you should do fleeces, whether you should rely on the lot. Sometimes that you need to do that. Sometimes you need to have a little more clear direction. But Saul gets a little religious here. We're going to fast. And we're going to fast, and God will give us the victory. Now, wait a minute. You're military people. Fasting only removes your energy. And he put them to a vow that they could not eat anything till they got the victory. And they're not going to taste any honey or anything. Cursed be any man that eateth any food till evening. So, okay, till evening you weren't supposed to eat. He put them on like a 12-hour fast or something like that. And these were big, hardy men that needed some food. And they were passing by honey, but they couldn't eat. Jonathan, of course, didn't hear this vow, so he had some honey, and it brightened him up. It's very possible also that these men had been without food for maybe 24 or 48 hours before this vow. This was not a good vow. This is like Saul trying to be religious, trying to get the favor of God by doing this, and he doesn't understand the heart of God when he does it. So he makes this foolish vow. Even Jonathan realizes it's a foolish vow, that he tasted the honey. And moreover, he goes, if aptly the people had eaten freely this day of the spoil of their enemies, which was found, but had there not been now such a great slaughter among the Philistines. Another idea is that they wouldn't have had this They wouldn't have had this victory had they been unfed, so it's better to keep them fed. But what happened is, because of this vow, these men turn on, when they're able to eat, they turn on the animals, they slay the animals, but they start drinking the blood in their haste to eat the meat. They weren't taking time to cook it properly, wouldn't take the time to butcher it properly, they were just cutting it off and eating it. They were so hungry. It's very possible that maybe they'd gone 3 days, maybe 4 without food because of all of this. I don't know. I do know that the men were very weary. And then Saul realizes that part of his error was these men were now drinking blood, which was against the law, which was against God's law. So he allows them to go ahead and get some sheep and go down in the Philistines and take what you want and let's eat properly. So they start having a good diet. Disperse yourself among the people and say, hither bring me a man his ox and every man his sheep, and slay them here and eat, and sin not against the Lord in the eating of blood. So if you're going to do this, let's not have the blood. But you can see the problem. The problem is Saul is is not catching the heart of God here. It's presumptuous. 2 words that keep coming up to me when I'm studying this is presumptuous, and that Moses acted unadvisedly. When we just do religious things, I'm just going to cast a lot. I'm just going to put out a fleece. I'm just going to pray, and if they do this, I'll do that. I know I've been guilty of that. If they just give me this, that's the sign. Well, you need to look deeper. Just because someone offers you something doesn't mean that's from God. You need to look at 3 or 4 levels down. Check several other boxes. And here we are. He's just trying to appease God through a fast to get God's. And I'm kind of drawing a conclusion here because of how this happens, and just showing the distinctive difference between Saul and Jonathan. And of course, Saul says, shall I go down to the Philistines and deliver them? But and God didn't answer him that day. So here's God not answering the king. And he asks again. And then he starts swearing that the problem that God isn't answering is because someone sinned, but it wasn't him. He was thinking that someone had broken his law that he had stated, cursed be any man that eats during a certain specific time. And he makes a vow that even if it's his son Jonathan, he'll kill him. Well, what happens is, as they go through the people and start talking, Jonathan admits that he ate during that time. Saul is going to kill him, but the people love Jonathan so much that they stand against Saul to save Jonathan's life. And they do. And Saul repents and pulls back. He doesn't fulfill his vow. Jephthah did. Saul did not. You see the problem here with this king. He doesn't understand God. He doesn't understand the heart of God. He's making presumptuous and unadvised vows, and then he doesn't keep his vow. He makes statements that he doesn't follow through on, and that is not a good king. And so we see this problem here between the characters of one and the characters of another. And he says that he would kill Jonathan, but the people stood against and said, God forbid, not one hair of his head should fall to the ground, for he hath wrought this day. So the people rescued Jonathan, and he died not. They said, this guy's a hero. You can't kill him just because he broke your little law. So we get a little ending of this chapter where we talk about that the Saul took the kingdoms over Israel and fought against all of his enemies, Moab and Ammon and Edom and the kings of Zorba against the Philistines, and he vexed them. So he started pushing out. Remember these groups I talked about? He started pushing back at them and vexing them. And he was doing some good work right here. He gathered the host and smote the Amalekites and delivered Israel out of their hands. And here we have a list of the sons of Saul, the daughters of Saul, and the wives of Saul. We also get an important person that we're going to learn about later called Abner. Abner is his uncle. Now, earlier, when Saul had come back from being anointed by Samuel, but he's not yet revealed to the people, he talks with his uncle. Well, that uncle is Abner, and Abner becomes one of his right-hand men. So he takes his uncle, which is his dad's brother, and he'll later on make his uncle his right-hand man. And it says in 52, and there was sore war There was sore war against the Philistines all the day of Saul. And when Saul saw any strong man or valiant man, he took him unto himself. So he created an army, but there was always war. There was no peace. We'll see later on with David. There's peace for a while, but David is also a man of war. The only person who really brings in strong peace will be Solomon. But then again, we're going to see where that one goes off the rails and he starts listening to his wife and starts worshiping other gods. That's getting ahead of myself. So many struggles here. God is really, we're seeing where these narratives are now getting a little more personal. You're getting a little more information. It isn't just Moses fought with Og and took this, and they fought with the Ammonites and took this land, and Joshua went over here, and then Caleb went up here. Now we're getting a little more focused in. We're getting a little more personalities. We're going to see some of these personalities going through the next few chapters. We're slowing down now to look at things not in decades like we did in Judges, where it was 20 years between this judge and this judge, and it was 10 years between this judge and this judge. Now we're looking at things happening within 5, 6 years. David is already alive at this time. Jonathan is alive. It's very possible that, of course, David was alive when Saul was made king, and David was alive, probably born, of course, born after Samuel was born. It's very possible. It's not possible. It is an assurity that his dad Jesse was a contemporary of Samuel. So you have Samuel and Jesse are together, and then you have Jonathan and David are in the same generation. So we see, in fact, we see that we're going to have this ongoing story, and we're meeting some of these personalities like Abner slowly. Later on, we're going to learn about Joab and Abishai and a whole bunch of others. Ahithophel, we're going to meet Absalom. We're going to meet so many other people. Shimei, all of these characters will come into play. So will Michael. Of course, so will Goliath and his brothers. So many people coming into play here soon. This is just the beginning, and it slows down, and we really get some good quality stories coming for us to learn from and see how wonderful this God is. It's all about him. Thank you.